I think it's a very good strategy when we come from the linear model, from take, make, waste, to the circular economy. And the construction sector is very important to reach this circular waste because we have so much responsibility and such a high footprint.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Walsh, and this is our second part of our series in circular construction. So we're stepping away a little bit from just pure Passive House, but definitely things that are related to carbon, as we'll hear, and sustainability in general. Joined this today by Zach. Zach, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Matthew?
Pretty good, thank you. And we've also got Ilka back with us because Ilka and Mary had this great conversation. So great to have you back as well, Ilka.
Great to be back. Thank you.
All right. Before we get into today's interview, Zach, we've got a few people to thank for the Passive House podcast.
Indeed. A big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Also, thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Glavel, Ingui Architecture, Minotaur, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. And thanks to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Gradient, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, and Source 2050.
Great. All right. Well, this week we have Anja Rosen, who is the creator of the Urban Mining Index. And Ilka, I think you do a pretty good introduction to Anja and the story of how you came to have this conversation with her. So I think we should just jump straight into your chats with Anja.
So welcome to the Passive House Accelerator podcast, Anja Rosen. I actually heard you speak probably like 2 or 3 years ago now at the Passive House conference. I think it was in Wuppertal. And you introduced the topic of Urban Mining Index. And that's something that I never forgot. I thought was very impressive. And we've been trying to get you to talk to us. And you said it wasn't fully developed yet, but you're ready now. So we're really excited about that. So, but to start out, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. So my name is Anja Rosen. I'm an architect and I'm a professor for circular construction at the Münster School of Architecture. That's my one role, and my other role is that I have an office for circular construction and sustainable building. So I'm a consultant for other architects to build more sustainable and more in a circular way. And before I was at the Münster School of Architecture, I was a honorary professor at the Bergische Universität Wuppertal. And there I also teach circular construction. I made my PhD there at Professor Annette Hillebrand, which is very famous in Germany for her experience in circular construction. We both together with 2 other ladies published the Atlas Recycling, the Manual of Recycling. Perhaps it's also published in English, perhaps you know it. And this was nearly the beginning of our research for circularity in the construction sector.
for those who aren't familiar with the term circular construction, can we start with defining that? And you also talk about urban mining. So can you just tell us if they're two terms for the same concept or if there's a difference between them?
Yeah, okay. So I think you know the difference between the linear way and the circular way. So the construction sector is responsible for more than 50% of the consumption of materials. And also, we as part of the construction sector are responsible for more than the half of all wastes in Germany. I think it's nearly over the world the same, in some countries a little bit more or less, but I think we have much responsibility for the consumption and for the climate change, because always when we use resources, there are CO2 emissions. And CO2 emissions, nothing other than waste, what we put in the atmosphere. And I think it's a very good strategy when we come from the linear model, from take, make, waste, to the circular economy. And the construction sector is very important to reach this circular waste because we have so much responsibility and such a high footprint. So the difference between circularity and urban mining, it's not much. As urban mining means that we use our cities, the urban areas, as a deposit for materials. So it's much more easy to take the materials from our infrastructure and from our buildings and use them again or make other materials from it, other products. It's much more easy grabbing into the ground deeper and deeper. And I think it's the only way that we can exist as human mankind when we come to a circular way, because all things here on the earth are in function of circularity. So we have the sun, which is a system above with this circular system, and all things on earth in nature have the circular way. But the humans don't participate in the circular way. We are the only living existence on which use the linear way.
Great. Well, that was very helpful. And, I'm curious how you first obviously you became interested in it because you're concerned about environmental repercussions of our waste production. So, but how did you first get interested in the topic?
The first way is in my childhood, I would say. I have to speak about a little bit of my childhood because my mother died very early. And I was 6 years old, and some people told me now she is in heaven. But I saw that I was at her grave, and I saw that she became in the ground. And I didn't understand how someone could be in heaven while the body is in the ground. And then it was very, very helpful for me when I was a child that my father told me that every living creature becomes nature again. So then I recognized very early this natural cycle. And this was a very good experience for me to know that I'm only a part of nature. Everything here on earth is a part of nature. And then, of course, I made my studies and so on. And I worked, before I became an architect, I worked where you can buy biological building products like clay and wood and so on. It was a trade with bio-based materials. And then I decided that I would like to become an architect because I know it is very important that we change something in architecture. I saw all these materials which will become waste later, and we traded with these ecological materials. And I knew it is much more better for the earth that we look at the end, because all biological building products, when you use them in a natural way, so that you don't contaminate them with substances that are not good, so they can become nature again. And I wanted to change something in the construction sector. So I made my studies, and then I became an architect, and I had a very good professor at my school. So I worked for Annette Hillebrand after my studies in Wuppertal. And parallel, I worked in an office. So that because I had to know, I must know both the science way and also the practice way. And I wanted to combine it because I think it's very, very important that we as scientists are not only scientists, because we must transfer it into the practice.
Yes, no, I think that's really important. I feel like, as a scientist, you have all these ideas and you think about how everything should work out, but being in practice, and you realize they needs to be something that incentivize people to do it the right way, because sometimes the right way is not necessarily the easiest way. So for me, really thinking about this index is putting value onto these already, used products, or the products that are out there that usually are seen as something that doesn't have value.
That's it. Mostly architects and other people who are working for buildings, they have a belly feeling. You know what I mean? A belly feeling from which is good for nature and for the building. But I think it's important that we also count it, because sometimes we don't know if I take this material and I put a little bit of this. So we make the natural materials dirty with substances, they are poison. And then you can't recycle it in natural cycles. And sometimes you can't also recycle it in technical circles. I think you know the cradle-to-cradle system. Most of you, I think, know it. And there you have the biological cycle and the technical cycle. And in both cycles, it is very important that you don't have substances with our disruptive material
that are non-bio-based.
Yes.
So can you explain then what the urban mining index is? Like, how does that work?
Yes, it is a system where you count all incoming materials. So you count the mass in kilogram or in tons. You sort it from the quality from where it comes. If it is a recycled material, a reused material, a regrown material, which comes from nature, or it is a primary material. So it is very important the percentage of secondary material or of natural material in the building product. This is the pre-use cycle, or the pre-use phase, when you plan the building and when you construct the building. And then it is very important over the whole life cycle how often you have to change something. So sometimes the windows are broken, or the roof waterproofing, for example, have to be changed in after 20 or 30 years. So it's always again waste and always again new material that you need. So you also have to count the changing of materials in the life cycle. And then at the end, you have to count the end. And then we count all outcoming materials, all outcoming waste, or all outcoming valuables. It's very important that you have much more valuables than waste, because waste is lost at the end. Waste is something that you can only burn, or you have to deposit it. But when you have recyclable materials or building products that you can reuse again, then you can make closed cycles. So it's very important if you can really recycle it, or if you can upcycle it or downcycle it. So the system looks what you can make again from the products at the end of the life cycle. But that's not all. That's a material level, but there is also a construction level, because a building is much more than added materials. It's also very interesting how they are connected. If you glue something, it is very hard to sort it in clean fractions. So when you have something that is only clipped together or lay one after the other without gluing and something like that, you can sort it very good. You can separate it. And that's the only way that you can recycle it. And when you can disassembling something, then you can reuse the whole building product again. And then you can make closed cycles. So you count the materials in mass or in tons from which you can make closed cycles or which you can use in other cycles. And the closed cycles are counted completely. And the other cycles, the open cycles, are mostly connected with loss of quality. The best example is concrete. When you crush concrete, then you can use the secondary material only to put it in the street or something like that, but you can never make concrete one-to-one again. You always need new cement and so on. You need also new sand because it is very limited what you can put in concrete from the recycled way. And this is also something what is, so it's also considered when you have a material which loses quality in this cycle system. And that is a construction level, but there is one more level, and that is the economic efficiency. Because when someone demolishes or disassembling a building, it is very important how much work it needs to separate all materials or to disassemble all things. The amount of the work is very important if someone does this, because when it is not economic efficient, the person will not do it, because we live in a market economy. So it's always important if someone can do it to earn money. So the economy efficiency is very important. So I counted many construction systems in my research. How much time does it need to rebuild it and to separate all these things? I made my research on rebuilding sites when buildings are demolished. And I also made my research with the construction industry together. We had many test stands where we had constructions from facades, from roof constructions, and so on. And I always counted the time what persons need to disassemble and sort it. And the time and the energy. When you need big machines, for example, I think excavators, they need much oil and diesel. I also counted this, and then I developed a formula which fits together all these three levels: the material level, the construction level, and the economic level. And with this formula, I counted the circular rate of the whole building. This is called the urban mining indicator. So at the end, you have an urban mining indicator for one building, for example, 50.2%, and the other construction for a building nearly is perhaps 20%. And then you can make decisions. Do I build my building this way or that way? So you have alternatives to count them, and then you get a feeling from after some years how to do it, and then you can learn. And perhaps in some years you don't need to count it anymore because you learned from this system. That's my idea.
So I understand that moving from the theoretical to the more implementable, that there was a software firm that developed this professionally, this index, this indicator. Is that now available for anybody who's interested? And is it available in English or is it only in German?
We developed a tool for the Solar Decathlon Europe 21-22. This is a tool of the University of Wuppertal. Perhaps you know the contest, the Solar Decathlon. It's a famous architectural contest, which takes our students from all over the world take part in this contest. And we had this contest from Europe in Germany, in Wuppertal, 1 and 22. And for this contest, we developed the Urban Mining Index as a tool. And this is also available in English, but it's not perfect. It's an Excel tool. So an Excel tool the functionality is very limited. And that's the reason why I developed with a software company a tool for the Urban Mining Index, which will be finished in June or July. And in the first step, it's only in German, but I hope that we can also develop it in English. But for all researchers and for students all over the world, I also can give you the tool from the University of Wuppertal, because it's a non-profit tool and you can use it for student work and for research. And this is also in English.
And what does that look like? Like, do you basically input each material for the building? And then at the end, like, does each material also get an urban mining index or indicator, or do you just kind of have it as a sum at the end?
Not the material, but the construction level. So when you put some materials together, so you have a floor or you have a roof. A roof is construction for many materials, and it depends on the connection between all materials. And for a roof or for walls and for inner walls and for the levels, the floors, you can count the urban mining indicator, and it's also possible, and all masses together. This is then the level of the whole building.
So it sounds like this is being applied to new build, like to new construction. Yeah. Which is very helpful, because you're already, now that you're building something new, you're already thinking about the reuse of all of the materials of the building. Is there a way to maybe indicate or use this tool to see what we already have available, right? Like buildings that are already built, can you use this indicator to say, okay, this is the value of materials that is already out there that's gonna be available to us in the near future?
Yes, you can use the tool also for the refurbishment of buildings. I think that's a good way. I think it doesn't make such sense when you use it for buildings which doesn't happen anything. So only for counting and do nothing. You could do that, but mostly I think it makes much more sense when you refurbish a building. And then there are two ways to count the materials. You can count only the new materials, what you add for the building. So you can use this for optimizing. But you can also count that the other way, the materials which are already in the building and which you reuse. And you can count them as reused material. Then you get a very good solution for it. But I think this makes sense, because you use an old building again. And so the result is very good, and I think this makes sense. But for optimizing, it is better that you only count the added materials, because of the mass. So the tool is based on the mass. And when you reuse the building, the mass of the reused material is very high. So it is not visible what you add. So sometimes it makes much more sense only to count the added materials for optimization. Because in the moment, I don't know how it is in America, but in Germany, in the moment, many people make refurbishments for their buildings because of the climate change. So they add energetically refurbishment. And sometimes you use polystyrol, you know what I mean? Polystyrol for the insulation of the building. And many people, they glue insulation on the wall. And the reason after that, you have a waste deposit, because you can't recycle it, and you make the house dirty with these materials. And it's a big waste deposit after that. So when you would like to optimize the energetically insulation, you can use the urban mining index only with the materials that you add and in the way how you add it. if you glue it or if you only fix it. And this is very helpful for architects to use the result in the urban mining index and to see what is the result in which way you use this insulation, for example.
So I have a couple of questions. One is, in that refurbishment, would you suggest that people think about how they could use more bio-based materials, for instance, like maybe cellulose or wood fiber insulation in that kind of? And then also, I'd love to hear how you've applied this to an actual project.
I think when you use natural materials like cellulose or other natural materials, that's the one way, but sometimes it is better to use recycled materials when the recycling is not connected to high energy use. Because natural materials are good, but we need area for the natural materials, and we need also sometimes fertilizers, and that's not good for the ground. And the area is always in competition with other areas. So we need also forests, and we need natural areas for the animals. And we need also area for our food. We need area for urbanism and so on. So the area is limited on Earth. And I think sometimes it's also good to reuse materials again and again and again in a technical cycle.
Can you give us an example of how you've applied UMI to a project? For instance, perhaps the Korbach Town Hall?
Yes, the Korbach Town Hall is a very famous project we had here in Germany. It's a little town, Korbach, in Western Germany. And there was a building from the 70s, which was made of concrete beside a very old building, a historic building. The town of Korbach decided to demolish it. And there was a competition for an architectural competition for a new building. And this competition was already made when I developed the urban mining concept. Because after the competition, the chief of the building department said, what can we make from this old building? So it was his idea, not mine. He asked me, what can we make with this building? And then I had a lot of experience from my research at the University of Wuppertal. And beside, I was working in this architectural office. It is called AG, who worked together in the competition with Heimspielarchitekten from Münster. They asked me to develop this urban mining concept. So we decided, yes, we demolish it, but we want to recycle the materials, for example, the concrete, to make the new building from the old building. This was the idea. So we separated all materials in the demolishing the building, and then we made the concrete for the new structure with this old concrete. This was the idea. And to develop all details for the new building, we used this urban mining index, because we told the chief of the building department, when we do it now in this way, that we use the old building, we have also to consider that our children in 50 or 100 or 200 years can also do it in a better way, because we know this old building from the 70s, there was also some waste in it. And we wanted to eliminate all waste. So we decided to use the urban mining index to make it better for the future. But it was not very easy, because buildings who were constructed in the 70s in Germany, they were not made for urban mining. Mm-hmm. Our fathers and mothers, they didn't consider that now we have a problem with climate change and we have a problem with resources. So they didn't build the buildings as urban mines.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to start thinking about it now, right?
Yes.
Everything we built new has to consider how are we going to reuse all of the material or assemblies. And that actually leads me to Are you teaching that to your students? And how do you think teaching your students this kind of concept or principle is going to change the construction industry?
Yes, I teach it as a university, so I'm at the Department for Construction, and all my tasks for the students, of course, are in this circular way. I think they will be better prepared when they start their work in the architectural office. I think also older architects can learn from them. I hope so. And I think it will be also changing in the construction industry. There is a beginning. I think it needs some years, but we have to change. We have no other chance as a mankind to exist when we doesn't change anything.
Yeah, and I think it's such important and really the right way to go about teaching students,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That they don't know any other way. So once they learn it this way, it's easy for them to just apply that to projects.
Yes, and they are very interested in that because it's their future. They know we have to make it otherwise than our parents, because they know we have to learn it, because there are no resources anymore for us and our children when we do it in the old way.
I would love to hear a little bit more detail about how the concrete was reused for the Korbach Town Hall and is that finished? Has the addition been finished on the building? And whether this city, educates visitors who come to the building about the whole urban mining process, and some more details about, well, for instance, in that building, what did you use for insulation when you redid it?
The building is already finished in 2022. We began with the planning in 2018. And this was a time where nobody or only very, very less people talked about circular economy in the construction sector. In 2016, 2018, it was very, very seldom to talk about a circular economy in Germany in the construction sector. So I think it was one of the first projects that did it in this way. It was a model. And when it was finished in 2022, it had an urban mining indicator of 42%. So 42% of this building over the whole life cycle is in a circular way. And we know when we would like to become a circular economy, sometimes it must be 100%. So we have to do things much more better than in Korbach. I think we did many things in a good way, but we have to change more things, because this building was made from concrete, and the cement industry has a big problem because the concrete can't be recycled in a closed cycle in the moment. And that's the reason why this building made from concrete has only 42%. We had perhaps to make it in another structure. But this project, this town hall, has very high demands on fire protection. Perhaps you can make it from wood or from steel, but it's very difficult. That was the reason why it was made from concrete. When you have other buildings, I told we developed the Urban Mining Index for the Solar Decathlon. So we had 18 projects in the Solar Decathlon, and the winning project had an urban mining indicator from 98%. Wow. It was famous as a very, very, very good. And how did they do it? They used materials or natural materials for sustainable forest.
Sustainably managed forest.
Yes, that's it. And so they closed the cycle. And we had other projects already in Germany which reached 60%. But when you want to reach higher urban mining indicators, you have to use reused materials and recycled materials on a very high level. And you asked for the other materials in the Korbach town halls. For example, we used foam glass for the insulation. We used wood for the roof. We didn't use any plaster, no plaster in the whole building. We let the materials as natural as it was possible. So you can see from inside the concrete walls, you can see the natural wood. And of course, we had some metal for the technique, and glass and wood also for the windows and so on. And for the roof, we used zinc. And that's the metal which you can use in closed cycles. And we avoided any glue or compounding materials. This is very important that you avoid compounding materials.
What did you insulate the roof with there?
With wood fiber.
So do you work together? I know in Germany there's some like companies emerging, like Concular, for example.
Yes.
Do
Yes.
do you work with them to buy recycled material, or how does that all fit together?
Yes, I know Dominic Campanella, who founded Concular very well, and he developed a standard in Germany for reusing materials for a pre-demolition audit. And that's something that I used first in a project in this moment, because we have a nice project in Wuppertal, where is an old hotel with buildings beside from an old factory. And this old hotel will be developed in a school. So the hotel will become the office for the school. And the old buildings from the factory, they are demolished or rebuilt, and there we build a new school. And we try to build the new school using the old materials from this factory, because they are very old bricks. And last week we were there to make some tests with this brick, how we can rebuild it, that they stay heile, not that we don't destroy it. And that was an idea from Concula to make this pre-demolition audit. Before you demolish a building, you have to look, what can I use from this building again on this side, or perhaps also on other sides, so you can sell perhaps also this building materials. It's a very good development, and I use it. I like to use it.
Yeah, this is really, really exciting. And I think we know, I mean, there's so many angles that we have to take to turn things around, right? There's energy efficiency, they're using natural materials, but I think this is a really, really important perspective as well. Just closing the cycle and realizing how we build right now really, really affects how we can build in the future and what resources are available to us. So thank you so much.
Yes, thanks so much for your time.
And that was Anja Rosen of the Urban Mining Index, and you can find that at urban-mining-index.de. There's lots of information there that you can find out a bit more about the whole process and what Anja and her colleagues have been up to. Ilka, tell us about that, the experience. You mentioned that you first met Anja a couple of years ago, and you've been waiting to have this interview. What do you think?
Well, I actually saw her present at the International Passive House Conference in Wuppertal, which back then was virtual because it was in the middle of COVID time. So I heard her speak and I just thought it was really, really fascinating. And I reached out to her right after, and she just wasn't quite ready to present about like what they had developed. Their calculator wasn't quite ready yet. So I was really happy that she finally agreed to just share what they have done. And I think what was just so fascinating to me was just even the terminology, the urban mining index, just to see what's already out there, just seeing that as something that you can mine, right? That is something that you can or should be reusing instead of just using materials that haven't been mined yet. So yeah. I just thought it was just fascinating overall.
I remember learning about the cradle to cradle concept fairly early on when I started doing engineering, and it struck a chord with me and probably influenced my career path. That whole idea, that realization from reading Will McDonough's book Cradle to Cradle about the whole concept of waste is kind of a human creation, and that everything else in nature returns to nature, which is obviously a strong philosophy of everything that Anja does. And she relayed that experience of, as a 6-year-old, seeing quite a poignant story really of seeing the physical end of her mother's life, but that taking from that the realization that everything living does return to nature, as she says, and then how that's influenced her life, her professional life, and thinking about wanting to use natural materials and have things return to part of the cycle in some way. I thought it was also really interesting. I mean, she's obviously really cautious of glues and using things that mix materials together in a composite way, which are very, very hard to pull apart. She mentioned much better to have things that clip together rather than glue together, because that's easier to separate later on. But I also thought she commented that we should definitely, it's better to recycle materials, but with the condition that the process of recycling doesn't use too much energy. And I thought that was a really good point, that it's all well and good having a material that can in theory be recycled, but sometimes it can be quite energy intensive to recycle those materials. So I guess the summary of all that is that it's complicated, and it's not always a straight, easy answer to know what to do. You got any other thoughts on that?
Well, as you said, it's complicated, but that's why it's even more impressive that they actually came up with a calculator that looks at all these different ways of how you reuse materials. And I don't even remember what else is included, but just the way it's, materials or assemblies are layered, as you alluded to. Glues are not that great, so they get a different index than materials that are not contaminated. So all these things are incorporated into this calculator. And in a way, it reminded me a little bit of like a embodied carbon calculator, but it just takes it even a step further, where you are looking at, these materials, how they are put together and how that impacts their value in the future. So it's complicated.
Yeah.
And it's kind of amazing too that there's such a theoretical part to this, right? There's so much like thinking and coming up with this calculator and, all these different parameters, but there's then also a very, very, or there has to be a practical part to it as well. Yeah. Right. And I think they both need each other. Like in reality, I think intuitively, that this is the right way to do it. But I think something like the calculator really, really just kind of puts value or puts a number to something, right? That helps people make decisions in the right direction. So
I think she used the words belly feeling, which I assume it gut feel, which I think is quite a good way of talking about it. Sort of that we have an intuition. We kind of feel like something like wood fibre insulation has got to be better, but that's got to be backed up by the science and by the data. And that's the value of having an index like this. And similar to, like you say, doing carbon analysis, I think is fascinating, because it throws up all these things that does sometimes provide answers that are counter to what our gut feel is. When we're comparing, a classic one here is we're comparing sheep wool carpets to polyester carpets and the embodied carbon that's in both of those, especially when you consider the ability to reuse the components of those materials. And it's complicated. I don't know what the answer to that is. It's hard. We have this conversation every single year about whether a pine tree is a more sustainable Christmas tree than a reusable plastic tree, and the answer is it depends. So having an index and having a calculator The index, I think, has that three components which are really important. She talks about the material side, the construction side, and the economic side. And I suspect that a function of all of those is that they're going to change over time, because the economics of different materials is going to change, and the construction methodology is going to change. So I'm not sure how the index is set up, but I can imagine that those values will be updated over time, and what's more sustainable now might be less so, and vice versa in the future.
Yeah, I just like that it really makes you think and helps you make decisions in your new buildings now too, because it's not just for existing or buildings or what's already there. It's really thinking about or helping you make decisions. How do you build better now so that it's better or easier to be deconstructible in the future? So, yeah. And that related to an index, to that number, I think is just really helpful, and very much looking into the future.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for you and Mary. Another fantastic interview. Great leaders that are allowing us and encouraging us to think beyond just comfort and energy efficiency, but also carbon and end of life of our buildings, and making components of those buildings available for their next life as well, which is part of this series that we're talking about in Circularity in Building. All right, what have we got coming up this week, Zach?
Well, we are taking July and August off for Passive House Accelerator Live, but we have lots of cool podcasts on the way throughout the summer. So next week will be the third and final episode of the construction circularity conversation. And then following that, it being summer in the Northern Hemisphere, we'll be doing a series of podcasts on smart ways to keep our buildings cool during the summer. So look out for those, and you can catch up on previous episodes and events from Passive House Accelerator Live on our YouTube channel, the Passive House Accelerator YouTube channel, and also our website if you're pining away for a live during the next couple of months. We'll be back live again in September. Yeah. There's a lot there, yes, definitely.
Awesome. All right. Hey, well, thank you both. And we'll be back for that third and final part next week. And don't forget, you can always check out loads and loads of information all across the Passive House Accelerator. Thanks very much. I'll be back again next week.